Okay, everybody. So thanks for joining me here today. Uh, Today we're going to step outside the world of the influencers and the TikTokers and the digital sphere, right? And we're going to talk about something a little bit deeper, a little bit more broad when it comes to this framework. And mind you, the expressive space framework that I've been working on started as a tool basically to understand burnout and disempowerment in the digital creator economy, right? But what happened was, like with all good research, right? With all research, it should anyway. As I developed this, I began to realize that this was not specifically a tech problem. This was a human problem. And I again, the curious nature in me come out, and I said, you know what, we got to get to the bottom of this too. So keep in mind today we're going to be looking at the human application of this framework. And I have said this before because I understand the farm and ranch community because that's where I'm from. That's where I'm of, right? But what creators face online is not all that different from what ranchers face on the land, or nurses in the hospital, or young doctors or whatever it is. It's not all that different. So keep in mind that in today's discussion, we're going to take this framework and stretch it across economic systems, across industries, right? To explore how expressive autonomy and clarity and support can shape the lives of people who are making a living in all kinds of ways, not just the digital economy, okay? So, for those of you who are just now coming into the conversation, I would, especially if you're online, I would encourage you to go back and watch some of this stuff that I've discussed earlier, and some of the research that I've done, and some of the little microcosms of what I presented here. You might be wondering though, if you're just this is your first video, what is an expressive space? And I want to remind you that it's more than just a job site or a digital dashboard, right? On some platform. This is a this is a mental, an emotional, a structural environment that allows people to engage with their work in ways that they feel more human. And when certain conditions are met, when people know the rules, when they feel respected and they believe in the value of the effort that they're putting into their work, you get real engagement, real connection with your work. You get a flow. But when the system feels chaotic, when you can't trust the process, or maybe when you feel silenced or whatever, you get what I've been calling the expressive dissonance to this, right? And this is where burnout lives. It's where cynicism kind of begins to creep in. And this is where people begin to check out emotionally with whatever it is that they're doing, even if they clock in physically, right? Or they show up for work. So, and I want to give you an example here that years ago, research has proven this. We've been able to document this in all sorts of ways. People actually cared about their job. The people who built the Hoover Dam and the other projects across the country in the Great Depression, they really cared about their job, and they took a real pride in what they did. The early factory workers in Detroit took a real, true, honest to God pride in what they did, and we've tend to lost that somewhere along the route. And I've had some very informal conversations with people who work at like Google and Amazon for sure. I've talked to a lot of Amazon employees. Talked with a lot of people who work in a lot of different industries, and they say that, while they're good jobs and they're grateful to have them, they don't feel like they're connected to their job. They don't feel like they're connected to the world that they are forced to work in. And they have no ownership to it, but yet they're preached this all the time, engage with your employee, have a great job, love your employer, take pride in what you do. They tell you all this, frankly, bullshit, that you should really feel comfortable about your job and you should be happy to be here. But really what they're telling if you listen to the employees talk, they're saying they feel more like they're being told, well, you're lucky to have a job. Well, that's quite a different way of it being interpreted, right? The company wants to make you feel like you belong there, but you're interpreting it as like, well, they're telling me I'm just lucky to have a job. That's where this framework comes into play at, folks. That's how this framework really begins to get applied. Okay. So we're going to break these pillars down a little bit, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about what these different aspects mean here. And the first one that we're going to talk about is the psychological autonomy. Do I feel like I have a say in what I do? That my choices matter? When you talk to these employees at these companies, very few of them feel like their choices matter. Very few of them feel like their opinion matters. Very few of them feel like they have a say in what they do. They're just a cog in a wheel. And deep down, they're miserable with their job, you know. And I was talking with an Amazon employee just recently. I was discussing this with him, and I said, "How do you feel about your job?" And he's like, "Well, it's a good job, but they work me like a dog, and I feel horrible. I'm treated horribly, but it pays decent for here in Texas, and good paying jobs for a lot of people are getting more and more difficult to find here in Texas. So an Amazon is a pretty decent job to have, right? But I mean that I'm being real with you. But you ask them about this, and these people are miserable when they go into work. And I think this kind of started to change maybe in the 70s, during the Carter administration, maybe at the first real downturn that these boomers saw in an economy. They never had to really live through that because they lived through the baby boom years. Maybe I don't know. That's more than I know. I'm just making an assumption, but it seems like that's where it started. But people feel like back then they had some sort of ownership, some sort of matter in the success of their company. Now they're not really feeling like it. They just feel kind of like like I say, a cog in a wheel, right? The second thing is creative flow. Am I able to Let me explain it like this. Are you able to enter a groove where the work feels natural and not forced? So to this end, I was talking with another guy who was working for an auto manufacturer in Mississippi or Alabama. I think it was Alabama. And man, he was miserable. He just felt like his job didn't matter, like he was just a replaceable asset. He felt like it was forced. Everything he did was forced. Nothing about his job felt natural. Well, that's a real problem. That's a real problem. So many people feel this way when they go to work and they're miserable. Now, the third thing here is economic transparency. So a lot of people know that no matter how much they hate their job or whatever, they can go to work, show up, do their job, make a little money and go home, right? They get paid every Friday or every other week, first and 15th or once a month, whatever it is. But they don't feel really satisfied with their job because there's no the first pillars are not followed. So maybe you have economic transparency, but you don't have anything else. But what if you're a rancher, let's say, or you're a farmer or something like this, or you're a coffee shop owner or something where and you're you have a stake in something, right? The economic transparency, and this is specifically for the digital creator world. Do I understand the systems that I work in? Can I see how these systems, my efforts connect to my reward? You know, People are asking themselves, they're beyond the economic transparency, there has to be some real transparency about how everything works. And these companies are so scared these days. They're absolutely scared. They don't want to let you know nothing. You're not allowed to know anything, my friend. You just show up and work. That's not transparency. And people want to see that, and they want to see how that connects to their reward. And then lastly, I think there has to be some sort of uh, emotional buy-in, right? Some sort of social support, you know? Who here has my back? Because let me tell you, even the most resilient individuals crack when they don't have a connection. They do. And that's where I think a lot of times the old trade unions, you talk with union people, they feel like somebody there has their back. This offered them some security, you know? And the whole conversation for a union is another conversation. That's a much bigger conversation. I'm not going to dissect whether it's right or wrong here, but it's true. And so when you have these four pillars that are intact, right? The workplace, the expressive space is very healthy. But when just one of these things breaks down, the whole structure begins to wobble, begins to look like this, you know? And then when two breaks down and three breaks down, eventually you have a full collapse. These pillars are there to hold up the solidity of the workplace. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happens when this whole thing finally crumbles, right? When it gets flipped over on its head, and this is that expressive inversion that you've heard me talk a little bit about. And this is really when the systems that are supposed to support workers, they begin to undercut them. That's what they do. And so you can think of these as policies that are passed from a distance with no input from the people that they affect, right? So let's just say Walmart. Walmart had this bright idea, right, where they were going to control the thermostat of the climate control system, the air conditioning and stuff from at all their stores, from all the way from Bentonville, Arkansas, right? They weren't gonna give the local creators or the local store managers, excuse me, or the local operators any autonomy to even determine what the air conditioning should be set at, right? Because they didn't trust their employees enough to keep it, at the right temperature. So they devised a system to start controlling this climate control from Bentonville, Arkansas, the headquarters. It didn't work because you had stores, out in Phoenix, Arizona that were, you know, middle of summer, these things were hot and they were uncomfortable and nobody wanted to be there. Nobody wanted to work there. But somebody believed that this system was effective. Some executive believed that this system was effective. Some middle manager believed that this system was effective. But they never went out there to the store and it worked good on paper. And so these policies that get passed from a distance, they didn't even ask the people in the store how they felt about it. They just implemented this idea. And then they didn't realize until later how stupid this was. Now, you can also take that to things like market shifts that reward speed and scale while punishing stewardship and care. You know, I watched this stupid bridge get built down here in Corpus Christi, Texas. They call it the New Harbor Bridge. Man, they were trying to get this thing done and they were trying to, impress everybody and make the largest bridge thing, whatever of its type in North America, blah, 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 blah. They were going to at the end of the day, it was just, it was a damn bridge. Okay. It was just a damn bridge. There wasn't nothing to it. But the stakeholders in this thing, the politicians and the engineers and all these people, by God, they wanted speed, they wanted scale, they wanted blow your mind away. And really, it's a damn bridge. But what this thing did is it took forever to build. Like people were confused by it. They had no idea what was going to happen with this bridge. Finally, earlier this year, they got the damn thing open. Made absolutely no sense to me, you know. Then I got to thinking about that, as I watched how this issue, firing the contractor, rehiring the contractor, finding a new person, all this and that, and I realized this is what happens when the expressive space becomes very hostile. You see hesitation, you see suppressed investment, and you hear the kind of same quiet question that's whispered across all people. Isn't this a joke? Why should I even keep trying? Isn't this a joke? Isn't this bridge a joke? Isn't this company a joke? Isn't this job a joke? They start taking their job as a joke, and this affects them. Okay. So let me give you a little bit of a scenario here, okay? I want you to picture a farmer or a rancher in a very dry region, right? Like say here in South Texas, and feed costs are rising, fuel prices are outrageous, and they've already downsized their herd completely, right? They've done everything that they could do. And suddenly national leaders announce new imports to lower consumer prices, right? So let's just say they start threatening to import cattle, beef from Argentina to the United States. Does this sound familiar? The timing, it's terrible. The message, it's unclear. The result, expressive dissonance. So as I talk about Donald Trump here and wanting to import cattle from Argentina, he's apparently been able to figure out how to piss off the ranchers. Okay, as I record this in late October 2025, but as I look at this thing here, right? There's ranchers out there who are struggling with all of this. Increased fuel prices, fertilizers higher, feeds higher, smaller herds, they're having trouble breeding. The timing of this thing with Trump is terrible. His message is unclear. And what are the ranchers doing? Deep, deep, deep expressive dissonance. That's what you're seeing. And this is not, listen to me here, this is not about global trade per se. It's about the signals we're sending to those holding the line here in domestic beef production. And believe it or not, those signals really do matter because they shape how people show up to work tomorrow. It shapes how investors and workers reinvest their time and money and effort. It shapes whether or not they're going to walk away and walk away from more than just a job. Maybe they walk away from a political party altogether, or they walk away from a social circle altogether. You think that these people are irreplaceable. You might want to think again. Your workers are not irreplaceable. Okay, so I hear you. Why does this even matter? Right? Well, who cares, right? It matters because we keep designing these economic systems that optimize numbers, but they ignore people and they ignore narratives. I mean, for God's sake, we've got a whole government that does this. You know, a good policy on paper will probably fail in practice if it destroys trust, if it strips away autonomy. If people don't understand what they're getting into, they're not going to love it no more. And I think that this framework, as I begin to really develop this framework, and every day I see more applications of this thing, this framework helps us tune up the world that we live in. It helps us stay in line with our lived experiences. And it kind of gives us a shared language to measure. And it allows us to map out not just productivity, but the overall health of the place that we're working at, the systems that we have. And this applies to gig workers and goat herders alike. The conditions that sustain dignity are universal. I really do believe that. The condition, if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this talk today, the conditions that sustain dignity are universal. Okay, so you're probably wondering what's next, right? Well, obviously the next steps here, right, are research. We need metrics, we need methods to track expressive health over time and across sectors. And that's what I'm working with some academics on right now so we can develop this thing. You know, we're asking ourselves the bigger questions like how does the expressive space degrade? How does it heal? What interventions work? You know, what I want to see here is a partnership between psychologists, sociologists, public health experts, and even some government policy leaders, you know, working at the federal and the local level, for God's sake. You know, I want us to listen to stories. I want us to be able to track outcomes and test models that restore the expressive vitality in real communities and in real homes. And I think that this whole thing can be done. I really believe in it. Okay. So I'll leave you with this. It is not just enough to ask people getting paid. That's not enough. We have to ask ourselves, are they still alive in the process? Are they seen? Are they respected? Are they supported? The expressive space isn't soft or secondary at all. It's the bridge between economic viability and human vitality. My friends, if we ignore this, we're going to continue to run businesses and have functions that are in peril. But I think if we rebuild it and we build new structures right and we rebuild the ones that are cracked, then this can become a real foundation for a more healthy, more humane economy. And in my heart, that's really what I believe. And I think together we can all do it. Thank you for joining me.